All right, thank you everyone for joining. We're excited to talk about this topic. We've had a lot of interest in food systems planning, especially from our Pasco County member governments. I know they have a food systems working group that they are operating internally in Pasco County. And so because of that working group and our interactions with our member governments, we've been incorporating food systems and agricultural actions into our regional resiliency action plan, as well as trying to build tools and resources for our member governments to start thinking about that. And so at this point right now, it's just kind of in our action plan, and we know it's a priority for our member governments, but we wanted to start talking about it more and making some resources available. So we've invited some professionals who know a little bit more about food systems and some of the obstacles that our farmers and small local agricultural practitioners might face when trying to do local food systems work. So with that, I did want to do some just a little bit of meeting housekeeping. So if you can mute yourself when you're not speaking so that we can hear our presenters. If you want to sign in to the meeting by just saying who you are and what organization you're with, that's helpful for our speakers to know who's in the audience, but not necessary. I do want to point out that this meeting is eligible for CM credits for APA certified planners, 1.5 credits for the session, and that includes one of the new sustainability credit requirements. So feel free, we're going to give some time to ask questions of our speakers. So when we get to that point, feel free to use the raise hand function or unmute yourself and ask your question or put questions in the chat. Any of those options work for us. So we have 3 speakers today, and kind of the organization is we're going to try to start with what's going on at the state level, get kind of a big picture of some of the obstacles that our farmers have identified in working with local governments and food systems planning, and then get a little bit more local with Dr. Elmore at the Pasco County Extension Office. Dr. Elmore has been, is part of the food systems group that I was describing before and has worked closely with the local government there. And then finally, Linda Fisher has provided some resources for Pinellas County governments. So she's going to talk about some of the resources that are available and how that project came to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine. Do you want me to share your slides, or do you want to share from your end?
I would be happy to share on my end if I could.
Yep. Let me stop.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. Can you all see my slides?
Yes. Yes, we can see the slide.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Catherine Campbell. I'm assistant professor and extension specialist in community food systems in the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Science at the University of Florida. And I'm going to start by just giving you some sort of big picture overview of what urban agriculture is and what's happening in Florida. And then I'll talk a little bit about potential opportunities to support urban agriculture or producers that are outside of urban areas that are interested in selling to urban markets. So as we all know, Florida is rapidly urbanizing. It's now the case that 44 out of 67 counties are classified as urban by USDA. We've added 2 million new residents in the last decade alone. In the map on the right, you can see this is from the US Census Bureau. And the orange parts of the map are areas that are considered to be urbanized in either a metropolitan or micropolitan area. And these are areas that are considered urban either because it's an urban core or because it has a high degree of social and economic integration with an urban area. And so some of those areas may not themselves be urbanized, but they are intrinsically connected economically and socially with the urban areas that they're close to. So one reason that people are interested in thinking about urban agriculture is that Florida has a number of issues with food access and nutrition and diet related risk factors. So 83% of Florida residents do not eat the recommended 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. 64% of Florida residents are overweight or obese. 13% have been diagnosed with diabetes. And then there are also issues of food insecurity, with over 1 in 10 Florida households being classified as food insecure and almost 1 in 5 children living in a household with food insecurity. So turning now to what is urban agriculture, unfortunately, there really is no simple answer to that question. There's no standard definition. People use different definitions depending on the region or the country or the field of academic study. In a very general definition, it's food production or animal husbandry in an urban or peri-urban, which includes commercial, non-commercial, and hybrid type operations. And there are many different types of operations and goals. And I'll review some now for you to give you a sort of flavor of just how different these operations are. So the first group I like to think of as the innovators. These are 2 examples from here in Florida. You can see that they're very high tech, and their primary markets are sort of high-end restaurants, hotels, and they're not necessarily in an urban core, as you can see with this aerial photo from Villages Grown. They're in an area that is not quite as urban, but they're selling to the urban markets. The second group I like to think of as the civic agriculturalists, and their goal are connecting farms, food, and communities. So they're growing, as you can see from this picture of an urban farm in Orlando. They are located in the city with the community, growing for the community, and they're really trying to increase that local connection with food. The third group I call the advocates. Many of these kinds of urban farms also have a nonprofit status. So they will be, this is one of the hybrid type operations that I mentioned before, where they're both selling food, but also doing some donation and nonprofit work. And they're often seeking to address issues of food justice and equity, and do this kind of work in food deserts to address food insecurity in communities. Another group is what I refer to as urban-oriented agriculture. And so these are more traditional small farms. Many of them are operating on a parcel of land where agriculture is a primary use. But their business models are focused on meeting that urban market, and they're intrinsically connected to the urban consumers, because research has shown that urban markets and urban consumers have more demand for local food that could actually be met within that urban space. And so this is an example of the interconnection I mentioned earlier with the core-based statistical areas in the map and the areas that are in orange, where these farms are in less urbanized areas, but their business model is intrinsically connected to serving those urban markets. And then the last group are grassroots agriculture. And so these are non-commercial, community-based kinds of operations where people can grow their own food. They are often sort of rooted in community development and helping the community members to grow their own food and foster social connections. So I'm going to briefly give you an overview of some of the key themes in the research literature on the benefits of urban agriculture. So there are a variety of social and cultural benefits. These primarily are found in the community garden kinds of programs where they foster community cohesion and social ties. They promote cultural integration and preservation within communities. And they also provide opportunities for education and youth development kinds of programs. Urban agriculture has also been identified as providing opportunities for economic or community development. So it can create jobs, there are opportunities for job training. It can be used for community redevelopment and an infusion of entrepreneurial activity. Urban agriculture is also connected with sort of health and well-being. So you recall the food access and food insecurity risk factors I mentioned earlier. Urban agriculture has been identified as a way to help address some of those concerns. For people who are actually engaging in gardening themselves, it can be a source of physical activity, and there are mental health and therapeutic benefits to gardening as well. And finally, there are environmental benefits, potential reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, increasing biodiversity, and providing habitat for pollinators. Okay, I'm going to turn now to some results from a study I've been conducting for about the last 18 to 20 months on the current status of urban agriculture here in Florida. So we did interviews of farmers as well as conducted a statewide survey. So we conducted 30 farmer interviews. In the map here, you can see where the farmers were located, and there was some representation in the Tampa Bay area. And we also conducted a statewide survey. And again, there was representation from your area in the people that responded. And so these were two separate studies, but I'm going to present the results together because I think it is helpful to sort of see the numerical data complemented by some of the quotes from farmers to help explain what the numerical data means. So in terms of farm characteristics, a little under half of the farms had been in existence for less than 5 years, which is relatively new. Florida being a large agricultural state, we have many multi-generational farms. So when you're thinking about urban agriculture of any of the varieties that I mentioned earlier, many of these farms are new to what they're doing. On the right-hand side, you can see the scale of the operations, and about 40% are operating on 1 acre or less, which is incredibly small for a farm in Florida. So just as a comparison, the average farm size is 246 acres. And 40% of these farms are operating on less than 1. In terms of who are urban farmers, their demographics track with the demographics of farmers in Florida in general. 81% of them are white, and they are primarily not Hispanic or Latino. This group, however, was very highly educated, and that differs a bit from traditional farmer demographics. About 70% of these farmers have a bachelor's or master's degree or more. 80% or so of the respondents were in a decision-making role. Sorry, I realize this is a lot to take in on one slide. In terms of age, about 20% were considered young farmers by USDA. So that's farmers that are under 40 years old. A little over 50% of them had been farming for 10 years or less, which the USDA classifies as a newer beginning farmer. And 45% were women, which is a bit higher than the average for rural farmers in terms of gender. So turning now to some of the results, I thought this might be of particular use to you in terms of thinking about how to work with these farmers. We asked them what kinds of certifications or enrollments they had in programs. And these topics span things like food safety, the BMP program, which is used to support water quality in Florida. And you can see on the left, the Greenbelt agricultural tax status was the most prevalent certification they had with 23%. But the percentage of urban farmers that really had any formal certifications or enrollment with programs was very low, making that an opportunity for both us in Extension as well as local governments to work with these farmers to get them enrolled in some certification programs. We asked them what kinds of production methods they were using, and they are primarily growing in ground in beds, roads, or fields. So you can see on the right, the hydroponic, indoor aquaponic operations, like the innovators that I mentioned earlier, were much less prevalent in this population. So many of them are doing sort of traditional farming in dirt. We asked them about what their sources of income were. You can see on the left, it's primarily vegetables, fruit, herbs, and spices, with some other kinds of activities sprinkled in, things like educational services, agritourism, as ways to sort of bolster their income from what they get from growing the fruits, vegetables, and herbs and spices. We asked them what their top 3 market outlets were. And you can see they are primarily direct sales. So they are selling at farmers markets, they're selling directly from their farm, they're selling online, or they have a CSA or community supported agriculture program where community members will sign up for a season and receive a share from the farm every week. We asked them what their top 3 goals were in their farming operation. And I think it's interesting to note that these were commercial farms, but the answer we got the most response on was the increasing food access and food security. And then second was environmental sustainability. And then third was making a profit. To help give you a little bit more of a flavor of what those numerical data show, we had this quote from a farm talking about how they support food access by allowing their customers buy food for a neighbor in need. And they're working with an organization to try to scale up people being able to buy food from their farm to help neighbors. They talked about their environmental goals and having the opportunity to show that being an environmentally conscious farmer is not in opposition. They talked about wanting to create closed loop system and really work on building soil. They talked about economic sustainability and job creation. They wanted to be able to create jobs and create good jobs for people where people can be proud of the work they're doing. They talked about wanting to strengthen their communities and the health of the communities, and by doing this by creating community or having a place where people can go for education, to sort of reconnect with agriculture, where some people in urban spaces may not know about food production. These farms see them as having a key role to play in helping people to reconnect with food and food production, and to help people learn about that here in Florida. We asked them what their top 3 barriers were. The number 1 barrier that they identified was labor. We do think that this finding may have been influenced somewhat because we conducted this survey last summer when we were just getting into the sort of labor crisis that we're facing right now. The next 2 most prevalent barriers were financial barriers of either accessing capital or maintaining profitability. And then after that was issues with laws and regulations. In terms of the labor barrier, because these farms are very small and they're growing multiple crops, they need a multifaceted individual. So somebody who can run a tractor and do farming and go to the farmer's market and work with customers. And they feel like, you know, for the $20 an hour they're able to pay these workers, they really can't compete in the job market in Florida right now. They also have issues with financing because they are not eligible for certain kinds of loans that are made available to traditional rural farmers. And so many of them have to rely on savings in order to start and operate their farms. There was a lot of discussion about issues with regulations and land access and the rural-urban interface. Every farmer mentioned this, dealing with, as they said, governmental red tape, trying to get permission to do certain kinds of activities on their property. And they talked a lot about, land being rezoned out of agriculture and, that creating issues of it's a lack of affordability or even just land that is available to be farmed on. We asked them what they saw their top 3 opportunities for the future being. They mentioned value added, which I'll mention a little bit more in the next slide. Agri-tourism, so people coming to visit in the farm either for education or having events like weddings. And so they said, in terms of value added, because they're really small, as I mentioned before, doing value added, which is just, making jams out of fruits or making sauces, things like that, that make it shelf stable, which they can sell at a little bit of a higher price, can really help them increase their revenue. But those kinds of activities are limited because they require a certified kitchen for them to be able to do that. In terms of agritourism, they see that as a great opportunity to increase income by, just having an event on a weekend. They can make some income, which is, requires less investment and time than potentially starting a new crop. So we hosted a workshop last fall with urban farmers, researchers at the University of Florida, as well as extension faculty, and identified the most pressing issues for urban agriculture in Florida. And the number one response that we found was government regulations, where everyone responded that that was one of the most pressing issues for supporting urban agriculture. That was followed by development pressure and sort of a lack of information and resources for these farmers, which we in the University of Florida are working to develop. So in summary, urban agriculture operations utilize multiple production methods, but they're mostly growing in rows, beds, or fields. They're primarily selling direct to consumer. Most of their revenue is coming from fruits and vegetables. They see future opportunities on capitalizing in their proximity to their markets and increasing revenue on the small land that they have. They face barriers that are common to all small farms, but then they have additional issues related to permits and zoning and land availability in these urban or urbanizing areas. And with that, I can take questions if we have time.
We do have time, and feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have questions for Catherine. Catherine, have you seen any local governments start to think about these zoning changes and working with farmers to kind of meet in the middle, I guess is?
Yeah. I mean, I know that Dr. Elmore, who's going to be talking next, was involved with some of these efforts in Pasco County. And I did a sort of statewide deep dive into the municipal ordinances around the state. And, my sort of sense is the approach in many places is a little bit piecemeal, where, in many cases, there is no discussion of agriculture in, codes of ordinances, but in cases where there is, it's small changes that have been inserted into existing codes, with the exception of, Pasco County as well as Leon County, that spent multiple years working to craft a new ordinance specifically addressing the needs of urban farmers and urban agriculture activities within counties and municipalities.
Someone's asking if the barriers are federal, state, or local.
My sense, Megan, is that at least the ones that the farmers we talk to, they're primarily on the local level. So code enforcement, allowable uses on parcels, things like that. Yeah, Dr. Elmore agrees. Yeah. I think, one of the difficulties is just that there's a sort of lack of understanding where people who are farming don't really understand permits or ordinances, and the people who are writing them aren't really familiar with farming. And so this is where I see University of Florida as having an opportunity to step in and sort of help bridge that gap, to help make that go a little easier. Yeah, I see it. So Nicole asked a question about contaminated soil in urban environments. That is a difficult issue. It's something that some urban farmers, or, for example, you might have a community group that's interested in converting a vacant lot into a space for growing food. They may not be aware even that they should test the soil and what kinds of concerns they should have. And so, I think that's an opportunity for Extension to reach in and help them know that they should get the soil tested. And as Dr. Elmore mentions here, people could then, do container gardening or things like that, where they're not actually interacting or growing in the soil.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So with that, I think we can give Dr. Elmore the opportunity to present on what's going on in Pasco County.
Okay, can you see my slides? Okay, you only see one slide.
Yeah, no, I see all of your
notes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, give me just a second. It's popping up all kinds of things here on me. Well, we're going to go ahead and move on. Even if you see two slides, or you see all of them?
I see two slides right now.
All right. Well, then y'all know what's coming next. Then let's put it that way. I'm not going to belabor it. So, I really appreciate being able to follow up with Dr. Campbell here. She's done some excellent work across the state to start kind of exploring some of these bigger issues that we're dealing with. What I want to try to do here is kind of get more granular and go into kind of the local setting, the local area, and kind of what we've been doing, and some of the successes and the impacts that we've been having dealing mainly around community gardens. So Dr. Campbell mentioned several different aspects of urban agriculture. We've tried to kind of drill in based on needs assessments with folks in our local community as to what makes the most sense to bridge some of these gaps, like she was talking about a little bit ago. And community gardens certainly fits that bill. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I do want to introduce you to a few people, okay? And first of all, this is Julie. Julie lost her job April 2020 due to COVID. She had 3 small children, found herself at home with not a lot to do, and she was concerned, like I think most all of us were at the time. There started to be some issues with availability of products and foods, and nobody really knew what was coming next. And so that uncertainty left her life in limbo. And she reached out to us. We have a very large community gardens program in Pasco. We're at 11 gardens now and growing. And she reached out to us, and we got her growing a plot. We taught her how to do it. And within about 2 months, her comment was, "This saved my life." I think a lot of people will look at community gardens and see it as, it's just kind of gardening. It is so much more than that. It is so much deeper than that. It's not just about the plants and the fruits and the vegetables. It is about the entire person, the whole person, and the whole community. You know, Julie was actually, she was spotlighted by UF Health for the benefits that the Community Gardens program gave her and her family. At the end of the day, yes, it was exercise. It was something outside. It was engaged with green spaces, which we know, and Dr. Campbell referred to this as, you know, being a psychological and emotional well-being factor. But with Julie, it was much deeper than this. And I have experienced this literally around the world in places that I have visited, and community gardens and small urban farms. This gave her a level of control over her life going into these gardens and producing her own food. Even if it was a small amount of food, it gave her a level of empowerment and control at a very uncertain time in her life. And she has continued to this day to have her plots in this particular garden. This one's in Land O'Lakes, actually. And her kids come in and have gotten involved. A neighbor that was a Holocaust survivor, that's well up into her 90s, has started coming into the garden and utilizing it. So it really starts to bridge the gap in terms of communities and the different demographics and the different walks of life that people come from. It stretches across everybody and touches their lives. Same with Lucas. Now I don't have a picture of Lucas here, but Lucas is a very real child. But he really represents all children, all youth, in my opinion. And Lucas does live with autism, and he was part of a 6-week gardening with autism program that we did in our community gardens. And I will just share with you that the experience changed Lucas, and it changed his family. They come into, I'm going to give you one good example here. He comes into the garden, not very sure, not a lot of confidence, having issues, looking people in the eye, all kind of the classic symptoms of autism. Very bright child, very capable child, but very much kind of locked internal. We worked with him in the garden, and there was one particular day, and something so insignificant to the rest of us changed his family dynamics. We offered him a strawberry that was being grown in the garden. Now, this, if you understand children with autism, anything new can be very uncomfortable and threatening. We offered him a strawberry, and it was, I don't know if I want to take that or not. He actually tried it in the garden. He instantly spit it out. But the point was, he tried it. Okay, said, I don't like it, but he tried it. Fast forward a few weeks later, and his mother contacted me, talking about how they had gone out for a family dinner at a restaurant, and they typically could not do this because if anything was different in his meal, in his world, it could set him into being very loud, upset, confrontational, and typically the family would have to leave a dinner. This one dinner, they served him his soup. It comes out looking a little different. And as he began to kind of not get happy with this, you know, he's starting to not be very comfortable, his mother reminded him, you remember you tried a strawberry in that garden. You didn't like it, but you tried it and it was okay. You survived it. Changed his complete outlook on life. And to this day, Lucas now wants to be a farmer because of these experiences, and he has kept his plot for over 2 years in the community garden. And so these are just a handful of the ways that these spaces can be utilized for way more than just the gardening themselves. They can really transform lives and transform communities. This is our community garden over in Land O'Lakes. It is a beautiful area. It is on Pasco County property at one of our parks, and we do work very closely with them, some of our libraries, even some of the municipalities in our county, where we have agreements to operate community gardens. Most of them are in low income areas, but not all. They apply across the board. Everybody can relate to gardening and to food production in some way, and also to the educational opportunities that come your way in these spaces. Urban agriculture can not only help people understand the wider concept of agriculture and how critical it is to every aspect of our life, but we can utilize these spaces to teach so many types of things. These are outdoor classrooms where we don't have people sitting in a classroom. And I mean, in the age of COVID, people are not necessarily comfortable in person, and it can be an issue to travel to far locations. But if you've got an outdoor classroom in your neighborhood where you can go and learn everything from healthy cooking habits, eating on a budget, obviously horticulture, all about pollinators and how to attract them, and healthy nutrition. I mean, you know, this is an absolute win-win for every community. So community gardens, more specifically, obviously they can supply a source of healthy foods to individuals and nutrition security. And as Dr. Campbell mentioned, you know, food insecurity is a very real issue, and something that the majority of folks at least have some idea, some concept, especially when they're living in or around food deserts and mainly focused on processed foods. And I think we all understand the health detriment to that. The physical activity, the recreational aspect. And again, we really saw this stand out during COVID, where people couldn't go to the gym, couldn't get outside, or didn't feel comfortable. They could still connect with other people in these spaces and be able to do so safely. And they were very confident and very comfortable in those spaces, but they were able to maintain and build networking and relationships in their communities. Again, the educational opportunities are just huge. They're tremendous. They're never ending. You can teach art in a garden. You can teach yoga in a garden. We do movement classes in our gardens. You know, everything over to the production of value-added products. What we have done is try to tie in other programs to community gardens based on needs assessments and address all of these different barriers, just like Dr. Campbell pointed out. We in Pasco County have invested in a commercial incubator kitchen where people can produce in these gardens if they want to, or don't have the space. Maybe they live in an apartment, a small yard behind the house, just not enough space to produce. They can produce with us. We can teach them then how to grow it, how to process it safely, how to package it, how to market it, you name it. And we are partnered with Pasco EDC to offer entrepreneurial training out of our incubator kitchen space. And so we've been able to help produce or spawn over 26 different food-based businesses, and many of them operate in some way or another, or at least learn out of our community garden spaces. So this is also layered with economic development in many, many different levels here. Obviously, we can use these as pollinator pathways, connecting communities, connecting neighborhoods to these spaces, to these green spaces where we're providing habitat, which is a significant issue, especially in our urban and suburban areas where there is very little space for a diversity of plants. So this helps with some wildlife habitat and diversity as possible as well. And then our beautification. These are areas that can be beautified, especially blighted areas, by these gardens that don't have to be very large. They can be pretty much any size they need to be and take on any kind of concept that the community wishes and the community needs. What's more important is you can use these as placemaking opportunities. And we've worked with planning and development in the past to, you know, if you remember, and I'm going to go back, I'm going to try to go back a slide here carefully at this garden. That wall that frames this garden was gray and drab. It was this retention wall there. And so we worked with planning and development, parks. We worked with the Autism Society of Florida, and we worked with a local artist to take the children's art from that autism with gardening class and transpose it onto that wall and make it a beautiful place. We had about 150 people that showed up to be part of the unveiling of this wall in a community that is incredibly diverse in the middle of Pasco County. So there are tons of opportunities in how you might be able to use these. And especially then there is that income potential where co-ops, market gardens, and value-added products can come into play. And we really saw this become a major influencing factor during COVID, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon, especially if you look at inflation, the cost of food, and some of the instability that could very possibly come in just globally. I think this is going to be a hot topic for many years to come. One of the other aspects about community gardens is they're very safe spaces. The community tends to really support them and take pride in these communities, and they will protect these communities and the people that are working in them. And they're also very non-threatening spaces. So if you think about the urban and rural divide, and Pasco County is a perfect example of this clash between the urban and the rural. And for the most part, you have no consensus. Nobody agrees on anything. And everybody is very angry all the time. What we have found is that community gardens are an excellent place to bridge the gap. Food is a unifying factor that everybody experiences and everybody values in one way or another. And plants at the same time, because of that psychological factor, lower these stress hormones, bring people together in many cases. And these places are areas where the urban folks could teach the rural folks something and vice versa in these spaces. And they can come together and everybody kind of see the same picture, the same vision, and be working toward the same goals together, which is pretty unusual space at this point in time. And so we're finding that our community gardens are helping us bridge that divide, which is something that Extension does very well. This is kind of what we're suited to. It's difficult. It's a tumultuous area and a tumultuous time, but these spaces being so non-threatening and so inviting make it very possible. And then we've also got this issue here that I want to go just a little bit further into. Like I said earlier, it's not just about the plants. Okay, it is much, much deeper than that. These spaces foster community and a sense of belonging. They help to build connections between neighbors that have no idea that the other one exists, or that they're not going to walk across the yard anymore and share food with each other, but they will do so in these community gardens. It's outside of the norm that they live in. And again, it's a very non-threatening space that does help to promote healthier lifestyles when they're out there working, obviously eating fresh foods and vegetables. These are some of our gardeners in an area where we work with the housing authority. And we've come in and put in raised beds in this area, and we've been able to teach classes out of this, and the children at this point won't hardly eat a meal if they've not grown something on that plate, which is fantastic. These are the exact changes, behavioral changes we want to see all across all of our communities. And what we know is that these families, these individuals that come in, again, having sometimes very little control over what's going on in their world, feel empowered when they begin growing these plants and seeing, no pun intended, the fruits of their labor. They become empowered, and that gives them some level of control in their life. When you have control over your food supply, and then think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you don't have control over that food supply, everything else doesn't matter. You're only focused on trying to survive. But if we can remove that need from people, because it's readily available to them in multiple different ways, and it's something that they have ownership in, it begins the process of empowerment, and that fuels further education into many different other areas. And this is where we start to see people think, hey, I want to have my own business. I want to take this further. or I want to get healthier. I want to be able to eat to get rid of the diabetes, all of these different, or lower my blood pressure. And we're seeing these impacts in the programs that we do in small spaces, in community gardens. This is another aspect here of resiliency planning. We talk resiliency, sea level rise, and all these kinds of things that are so prevalent and in our faces, but we're missing some of the forest for the trees here with these kinds of things, because community gardens are not just for skilled. It can be absolutely anybody that's out there in these gardens, that's learning, that's growing, that's interacting and networking. And they become, in my opinion, the backbone of a local food system, because you can then build into these co-ops and these CSAs that Dr. Campbell was mentioning earlier, these small urban farms that are about an acre. You build into these and you build appreciation in the community for these different spaces. And when you do that, that can help to start the funding starting to flow into these spaces when people are starting to recognize their value. Again, opportunities to beautify blighted areas and encourage diversity, not just in plant life, but the people too. Encouraging and taking advantage of the fact that we have a wide diversity of individuals in our communities, and utilizing their strengths and their advantages to bring them together and to get the best out of our communities. That's what these spaces allow us to do. It's a safe outdoor recreational activity. It's a healthy activity with a lot of activity in some cases, if you're a really heavy duty gardener, where you can produce healthy foods. Another aspect is this is an opportunity to build volunteerism, and again, help to create community and build community where people have ownership in what's going on in their neighborhood. And that is incredibly, incredibly important to help us build stronger communities and resilient neighborhoods and individuals that can basically deal with anything that the world might throw at them, like we've seen over the last couple of years. How you can do this, how you can start to be involved, okay? Some ideas: reaching out to the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences extension offices. Every county has got an extension office. And if they're not already working in this area, hopefully you can work with them to be able to get the funding needed and the support needed to start these kinds of programs. Reaching out to community organizations and getting them involved, not only for labor purposes or for financial support, but you want and need their ownership in these spaces as well to ensure that they're sustainable. And again, here and here it comes, that big one that Dr. Campbell pointed out, working to change ordinances and zoning and in long-range planning concepts to ensure that urban agriculture is not just allowed, but it is promoted, and it is necessary. It is absolutely necessary. And at the local level, that's where we have the biggest issues overall in these types of situations. I mean, we faced issues where, 50 years ago, the Parks Department had to put a moratorium on using parks in any kind of agricultural opportunities. That was 50 years ago, not today, and things need to change. Building that coalition of supporters is critically important, and that's going to be everybody from government on down the line to continue to grow these kinds of programs, and also to be able to champion the funding that's needed. And here's the big one: you cannot depend on volunteers for these spaces, and this is the biggest problem that I see overall. I have everybody from consultants and management companies to government officials that love these ideas, that want to start these ideas, but they don't want to fund positions to take care of it. They want to depend on volunteers to work these spaces. That doesn't work over time. That is not a sustainable model whatsoever. You must invest in the people, and it is not that expensive, to be quite honest with you. It really is not that expensive compared to any of the other programs that we operate. Our community gardens program return on investment is easily about $100 for every $1 that's spent. It's a tremendous win-win for everybody. Okay. And what I will say too is to require, start to look at not just allowing and making allowances for, but requiring community gardens and markets in new developments in our land development code. This doesn't need to be an option. This needs to be a requirement, to be quite honest, for so many different reasons, some of which we've touched on. So, you know, we invest in infrastructure, we invest in roads, we invest billions in bridges and roads and buildings and all this kind of stuff. But my question is, why are we not investing in the future by turning to green infrastructure? Everybody needs it. Everybody benefits off of it. Okay, especially our children in so many different ways. And it's time to start looking at investing some of those dollars. And again, it's not that much compared to everything else. Investing those dollars into green infrastructures where we're allowing for wildlife habitats and pathways. And, you know, biodiversity in our different parks, our waterways, our greenways, and our blueways, not just to try to protect them, but to try to leverage the impact of these and the value of these spaces into our environments, and provide things as simple as community gardens. They can literally save lives, and we have seen that time and time again. So I've got the wall up here. This is Lucas's poem that he wrote, and it was transposed onto that wall at one of our community gardens. And I think it says so much, and you know, out of the mouths of babes here, about how simple this can be, but how much impact it can have. Food makes me happy and strong. I will leave it at that, and I am happy to answer any kind of questions or take any kind of comments. I just appreciate everybody being here and trying to learn more and become a visionary in your particular neck of the woods, and how we can change things for the better. Any questions?
Sheridan says that helping to run a community garden when she moved back to Florida after several years, and gave a huge sense of place when I needed it the most, and eventually met my husband there. But running a garden is worthwhile, but so hard / time consuming, and incorporating as a nonprofit with a board was essential to making sure the garden lasted over time.
Yes, sustainability is a major issue. And that's why I said, you know, volunteers are great, and we need those. And we want to encourage volunteer programs in these areas, because it's going to benefit everybody. And we have a lot of folks that want to engage their communities in different kinds of ways. But we have to be able to invest at the same time. Typically, we're looking at having to partner with nonprofits, for-profits, governments. You know, my hope is we get to a point where we don't have to depend on so much research or resource sharing to be able to pull these kinds of things off, because they don't have to be that difficult. But you do have to have those champions, those faces, people that are getting paid to work these areas, because why not? It's important enough, it's valuable enough to be paying folks in these areas. And so it's just a little bit of a different way of looking at things from the past. We've always just kind of glazed over these ideas and said, well, we'll get volunteers to do it. Well, great and fine, but there's got to be leaders. There's got to be leaders, and you got to be paying these people.
Megan asks, have you seen any community garden members become territorial and not wanting, not wanting the local government to promote it because the members worry about overcrowding? And how do you deal with that?
Yes. So the first thing you have to do, and again, each garden is different. Every one of them is different based on who's involved, location, resources, everything is very different. But what you have to do is come in and you set up bylaws in the beginning. This is about management. These are project management 101 here, where you're coming in and you're working with those individuals that have plots, that are volunteering. You're establishing roles very early on. And again, if you have somebody that's getting paid, that is in that kind of anchor position to be able to say yes and no, and everybody understands, everybody's on the same page from the beginning, that they are ultimately in control of what's going to go on in this space, and not just, Bill over here and Sue over there type thing. Everybody from the get-go has to be on the exact same page, or you will have those territorial disputes. There's territorial disputes between plots, people with just plots in a garden and not just necessarily the government. But you make allowances so that we don't have an overcrowding situation. And then you also, that tells you you need to be offering more spaces if you've got a territorial situation. We need other gardens, not just necessarily in that particular spot if it's starting to get overcrowded. But it's all about people management from the very beginning. It is not just about the plants. It is mostly about the people from the very beginning.
Amy asks, what would you recommend planners incorporate into comprehensive plans and long-range plans to encourage investment in community gardens?
Well, absolutely. I think giving incentives to these developers. I mean, obviously, and if you're not necessarily going to require it up front in the planning and the development, give them the incentives to come in and put in these spaces. And also, say these are not necessarily just going to be standalone. They have to sustain themselves. The planning and development departments have a huge role here in designating, being able to say, we're not going to allow every single square foot to have a building on it or a piece of concrete on it. And I think at the end of the day, those people probably have more influence than pretty much anybody else. And being able to drive home these kinds of messages, and then to work with extension offices, partner with them, because we know how to get this stuff done. This is what we do. And we're very good at being able to network and bring in different allies from the community, being able to work with them, crossing the bridges with the different organizations, and being able to bring a complete package, like to your board of commissioners or mayors or whoever's in charge of your situation, and saying, as planners and developers, this is the future and we need to be moving toward it. This is not about being progressive. This is not about being progressive and trying to increase our levels of service. This is about maintaining what we've got. And this is how we're going to hang on to it, by encouraging these spaces any way possible.
Dr. Elmer, when you're talking about like funding positions, are those positions in a nonprofit, or could it be a position in a government?
They could take on, again, the sky's the limit with these kinds of opportunities. So I will tell you that to start my positions in Pasco years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of, a lot of the powers that be didn't necessarily see the value. And so I worked with local stakeholders to raise funds to hire a county position, to get a new position that we funded through donations for the first 2 years, really. And after the county could see the successes, the impacts of just a handful of gardens at the time, they said, this is something we certainly feel comfortable investing taxpayer dollars. And at this point, we now have 2 fully funded county employees, and getting ready to hopefully hire a 3rd in the next year to help us continue to produce more gardens, help to maintain and teach out of those spaces. They do help teach and help folks solve horticultural problems out of those spaces, but they end up in the long run, the gardens begin to take care of themselves, and that's exactly what we want. Our employees tend to be taking care of the people and managing the people in these spaces. But you could work with municipalities to pay to fund some of these, obviously with some of the nonprofits, maybe even some grant dollars that are out there to at least get these up and running. It's a very easy sell once you get them up and running. To get folks to understand the value up front can be a little bit difficult, but when they really see the impacts of these boots on the ground, grassroots is kind of the way I look at it, types of programs, they begin to invest in them in many, many different ways. And it opens up a lot of doors for citizens at the same time in the community. Local parks and recreation departments. I'm going to be very honest. No, I don't see those as being the best to operate these gardens. I do think it has to be, you know, the folks in Parks and Rec do a fantastic job maintaining public spaces, utilitarian types of spaces, but the knowledge tends to be very different and much more concentrated from a horticultural standpoint. And you do need folks that have a background or the ability to learn very quickly. There are issues in food safety. There are issues in water quality and fertilization, and there are all sorts of issues. And that's why I do believe that extension is honestly the best vehicle to manage these spaces, which is not something we typically ever do. We educate. That's what we do. Across the board, across the entire nation. We are educators first and foremost, but I saw very early on the need based on needs assessments and working very closely with our community, that community gardens could help fill many of these needs and these gaps that we were seeing. And I very quickly also realized there's nobody else that could run it like we do. We can come to it with the knowledge, the people knowledge, the management, the project management knowledge, the volunteer training and management, and also then the horticultural knowledge. But then we can take it a step further with folks in helping them if they want to move toward maybe the production of value-added products and cottage foods in some cases. So I might be a little bit biased, but I do believe that extension is honestly the best. What I have seen, what I've experienced, I get a lot of calls from some parks departments around the state. I've had calls from a lot of consultants and even some management companies that are managing community gardens, and they call me and ask me for help a lot. And they want to turn to my volunteers. They want to turn to, you know, our knowledge, and we are happy to provide knowledge and education in these spaces. But they are also, they suddenly are facing sustainability issues, and that's something we don't have a problem with because our model is very people-based and not plant-based in this case.
I think some in the audience might not be familiar with extension.
Breaks my heart, but it's something I hear all the time. So extension, you may have heard of cooperative extension or extension service. It is a well over 100-year-old institution that works through the land-grant university system in each state. It is across the entire nation, and we operate educational programs at the local level. We take the fantastic research and teaching at the land-grant university. So in Florida, that's University of Florida. And we also have FAMU, that's one of our partners in extension as well. And we bring all of that great knowledge out into the communities and put it to good use where it doesn't just sit on campus. So we are working to solve problems locally at the local level through extension. So here in Pasco County, we work on livestock, pasture management, community gardens, obviously horticulture in many different ways, Florida-friendly landscaping, which is a state statute. And that's a presentation for a whole nother day. Family and consumer sciences, anything from food and health, nutrition to financial management. And then 4-H, which is youth development and leadership program. Ah, yes, she's got the IFAS. ifas.ufl.edu. Yes, you name it, we pretty much do it.
Just in case you're out of the state or this is the first time you're hearing about extension, it's a great resource. So
yeah, it is open to anybody and everybody. We work with anybody, especially very closely with local government, and hope to be moving to working more closely with planning and development. I think it's absolutely critical.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
Speaking of working with planning and development, our next speaker is Linda Fisher from Forward Pinellas in Pinellas County. Forward Pinellas has developed some resources for Pinellas County governments to start thinking about urban agriculture. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you. It is great to be here. Can everyone hear me and see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about a study of urban agriculture that we did in 2018 in Pinellas County. But I always like to start with telling people a little bit about my agency, Forward Pinellas, because not everybody knows who we are. But we're a countywide agency. We're separate from the Pinellas County government. We represent all 24 cities and towns in Pinellas County and the unincorporated county. We're the MPO and Planning Council for Pinellas, so mainly what we do is integrated countywide land use and transportation planning, but we also provide technical planning assistance to our local governments. And as part of that, we have what we call the Knowledge Exchange Series, where we take a deep dive into 1 or 2 emerging planning topics each year. We research best practices that are happening both within Pinellas County and in other places. And we create technical resources that local governments can use. Our inspiration for looking at urban agriculture was a request from the city of St. Petersburg. They came and made a presentation to us in 2017 because they wanted to encourage urban agriculture in their city, but our countywide rules, which govern land use throughout the county, inadvertently didn't allow some of what they wanted to do. And that conversation really got us interested. Not only did we meet their request, but we ended up partnering with the city and expanded on their city effort to make it countywide. You've heard a lot today about why we would want to encourage urban agriculture. We found the same reasons. We want to increase access to fresh local food for our residents, particularly in underserved areas, food deserts. And we wanted to decrease the environmental impact of food by decreasing the transport miles that are needed, and the food is fresher and more nutritious the shorter distance it has to travel. So a lot of good reasons that you've heard a lot about today. There's also a growing market for local food culture, including successful tourism campaigns around the country that are built around locally grown and prepared foods. Sacramento has a big farm to fork campaign. And this is another example from Charlotte, North Carolina. The Ritz-Carlton there has a rooftop garden and honeybees, and they use that as part of their marketing for their hotel. Even Visit St. Pete Clearwater promotes our local food scene, mainly through the local farmers markets. So it's a genuine economic opportunity for communities. So when we talk about urban agriculture, of course, it takes many forms. We all know what a traditional farm looks like. There aren't many of these left in completely urbanized Pinellas County, but there are a few in agricultural pockets here and there. I can't guarantee they all have red barns, but we do have them. What we mostly have here are community gardens. Mainly, again, as you just heard, they can be just small parcels of land in the middle of residential neighborhoods where people work together to grow food. We have some that are municipally owned and operated, but mainly in Pinellas County, they're run by nonprofits. Given that we don't have a lot of vacant land in Pinellas County, another solution is hydroponic farming, where plants are grown in water or another medium instead of the ground, and you can stack hydroponics vertically, so it's very space efficient. Other creative ways to save space are to grow crops on rooftops or even on the outside walls of buildings. And these examples aren't local. The rooftop garden is from Winter Garden, Florida in Orange County. This outdoor garden is actually in Denmark. So we don't have that here, but these are examples of things that could be done here. And then you can go all the way and grow crops entirely inside buildings. And this example is local. This is an indoor farm in St. Pete. So there are a lot of possibilities. And those examples are just plants. You can raise a variety of other things in the urban environment. Chicken and bees are especially popular as part of the backyard food movement. A number of our local governments allow backyard chickens. Beekeeping is actually allowed statewide by Florida statutes. And we do have a lot of that here in the county. You can also raise fish in a backyard pool or in tanks, either indoors or outdoors. And Urban agriculture doesn't just include the growing and raising of food. Again, you've heard this theme today. It's really part of a whole local food system of supportive activities. That includes things like composting, which both improves the soil and helps recycle organic waste and keep it out of the solid waste system. And there are local businesses in our area that just make compost. For people who grow food for more than just their personal consumption, they need a place to sell it. And that can include farmers markets or sales right on site where the food is grown. Another important component is education. Most of us were not born farmers, so in order to have urban farming, you need a system for teaching people to do it. And we worked very closely with our local branch of IFAS. They were just so instrumental in this study, providing a lot of resources for urban farmers. Now, if you want to allow urban agriculture in your community, in some respects, it's like any other land use. You need to make decisions about what activities you want to allow, where you want them to go, and how you want to regulate them. But there are also some special considerations. In our county, as I mentioned, one of the first hurdles was our countywide rules. St. Pete brought to our attention that a lot of what we've talked about here today either previously wasn't allowed in the rules or it wasn't allowed in very many places. And that wasn't deliberate. It was just the fact that the rules have been around since the late 80s and we didn't contemplate a future where there would be a lot of urban agriculture. So we allowed agriculture with a definition, but only in some industrial or heavier commercial land use categories. And that was because the definition allowed virtually anything agricultural up to and including large livestock. So it really wasn't appropriate for a lot of locations. We also allowed community gardens, and those could go in virtually any land use category, but it had to be nonprofit and they couldn't have any kind of ongoing on-site sales. And what St. Pete found in their work with the local urban agriculture community is that those rules were just too limiting. So in 2019, we amended the rules to add a third definition, which we call agricultural light. In general, it allows any agricultural use that doesn't create odors, noise, or pests that impact other properties. And that's similar to the way that we regulate manufacturing in Pinellas. The only specific limitations it has are that it only allows small livestock, so no cows or horses, and no processing of animals is allowed on site, so no butchering or anything of that type. It does allow on-site sales, and it's allowed in virtually every land use category countywide. As with everything in the countywide rules, a local government can always be more restrictive than this. No one has to allow agricultural light at all, or they can allow it in a more limited fashion. But our adopting this in the rules just created a new option that local communities could take advantage of. So once we addressed the countywide barrier, there was still another big hurdle, and that was the Florida Right to Farm Act. It's part of Florida statutes, and other states have similar language. It was passed in the 1970s to protect rural farms from being encroached upon by suburban development and then being declared a nuisance by that development. To do that, it prohibits local governments from imposing most land development regulations on farms. So it had a completely valid original purpose. Unfortunately, the act is worded so broadly that it applies to any commercial farm on private land. So in the modern era, a new farm could get started in the middle of an established city, and it would still be exempt from most land development regulations under the act. Now, that doesn't apply to nonprofit farms or any farming that takes place on public land or where it's not a principal use. So if you're a restaurant with an accessory rooftop garden, that wouldn't qualify. So there are still a lot of options that communities can do without running into this issue. But if you allow commercial farms on private land, you do have to choose carefully where they can locate because of the limitations on regulating them. Now, we did try to find a solution to this. In 2019 and 2020, the city worked with state legislators to try to get an amendment to the Right to Farm Act. that would recognize urban agriculture as being distinct from traditional farms, and we helped with that effort. Unfortunately, the attempt was shot down by the Florida Farm Bureau, which is the largest agricultural lobbying organization in the state. We had, excuse me just a moment. Thank you. We had met with their representatives ahead of time, and they seemed to agree with us in principle, but then they came out and stated that they opposed any changes to the act. And that was enough to scare away any legislative sponsors from taking it up. So that was very frustrating. Finally, in 2021, the city was successful in getting a pilot program adopted into state law. It allows up to 5 municipalities with a population of at least 250,000 to regulate urban agriculture on a trial basis for 3 years. The hope is that will allay the fears of the traditional farm lobby and that this can eventually be made permanent and statewide. Unfortunately, in the meantime, it doesn't help anyone who's not in the pilot program. And we know that that has had a chilling effect on a lot of our local communities from expanding urban agriculture. And that may be behind some of the local regulatory issues that, that urban farmers have been struggling with. But with those considerations, if your community still decides that you want to allow and encourage urban agriculture, then what are some things that you can do besides just making it a permitted use? As part of this project, we worked with a panel of urban agriculture stakeholders, and here are some of the things they told us. The biggest item is allowing ongoing on-site sales, particularly in residential areas. That's key to both helping farmers keep their transport costs down and, again, as we talked about, providing access to fresh local food. Just finding land to grow things on is difficult, particularly in Pinellas County. Local government programs to identify vacant lots that could be used for farming are very beneficial. And I know St. Pete was starting to do some of this, but I'm not sure where they are with it today. I mentioned compost earlier. Public sector programs that encourage composting, either by businesses or households, are very helpful to urban farming, especially around here where our soil is very sandy and needs a lot of help. And in 2020, St. Pete decided to offer free backyard composters to any residents that wanted them. They initially ordered 500, but demand was so overwhelming, they ended up having to order another 4,000 of them. So it was very successful. And in full disclosure, one of those composters is in my backyard. And then some local governments around the country go even further and provide small monetary grants to help get urban farms started. That is mainly a thing that we saw in larger northern cities that have large areas of disinvestment. I don't know of anyone who does that locally, but it is an option. And then lastly, you can provide technical assistance to residents. And that can include help with navigating your local regulations. I know we found Pasco County's website to be very clear in their ordinance, and we used that as an example. This flowchart example is from Lawrence, Kansas, and they have one of the clearest citizen-oriented guides to urban agriculture that we've seen. You can also help with holding workshops or marketing campaigns and so forth. Miami-Dade has an extensive marketing campaign that they call Redland Raised. Redland is an agricultural belt in the Miami-Dade area, and they provide branding and hold events to help promote locally grown and raised food. So there's just a lot you can do. So we wanted to help any interested communities get started. So we prepared a toolkit. The main component is a handbook. It has an introduction to each of the topics we've talked about today. And it is intended to be very clear and citizen friendly. But it's also full of links to more in-depth studies and publications on things like regulating urban agriculture, incentivizing it, marketing it, and so forth, for local governments that really want to take a deeper dive. And we provide a lot of examples of how these things are being done in Florida and around the rest of the country. On the public outreach side, we wrote a blog post, which has a citizen-friendly introduction to the concepts, and we created a brief video to go with it. And all of these are available at this link at the top of your screen, and I will also paste this into chat when I'm done. If you'd like, the video is about 2 minutes and I can show it to you right now. We still have enough time?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
just have to put up with me fumbling between screen share windows for a moment.
This study is a collaboration between Ford Pinellas and the City of St. Petersburg. Urban agriculture provides opportunities to grow fresh local food in urban environments where land is at a premium. Examples of urban agriculture include community gardens, rooftop gardens, indoor and outdoor vertical farming, and hydroponic farming. Local communities around Tampa Bay have begun looking into where to allow it and how to encourage it. Building on efforts begun by the City of St. Petersburg, Ford Pinellas has met with local governments, farm owners, educators, and others in order to understand the opportunities and challenges of urban agriculture. Local sales can even drive tourism. Some communities are interested in leveraging the economic potential of locally grown agriculture.
A lot of the money isn't going to be made necessarily just from the growers, it's from all the industry sectors surrounding and supporting that industry that also create additional jobs and opportunities.
Communities working to promote urban farming may not only benefit economically, but they may also help to combat food deserts, which are areas lacking convenient access to fresh food, compounded by lower incomes that limit residents' mobility.
We have a lot of people that are needing healthy food. We have a lot of processed food that is available to people. A lot of cheap, affordable food is not always the healthiest for us. So to be able to give people access to whatever fresh fruits and vegetables that they can, and increasing consumption in that way is great. Having your own garden and knowing how to grow your own food is historically and even now a great way to help an individual family be healthier and have access to more food.
For new gardeners, I would say to get involved with an existing community garden so that you can learn from people that are already doing it hands-on.
Ford Pinellas has put together a toolkit to help local governments navigate through urban agriculture. Visit fordpinellas.org for more information.
Okay, so that is all I have. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thanks, Linda.
And I promised you that link, so I will go ahead and paste that.
And Amy and I both put the link in the chat already. So
Oh, okay.
I
Great.
think as long as it's your project/urban culture link.
Yes, thank you.
Were there obstacles to the composting programs in the countywide plan, or was that something that was easier to implement?
We didn't identify any barriers in the countywide plan. One thing we heard from, there was as part of our stakeholder group, there was a representative of a business that does composting. And what they told us was that composting businesses are regulated like they are giant solid waste operations in terms of the permitting and the regulations that they have to meet. And so, and we provided some examples of resources for this, but we encourage local governments to look at composting as its own thing and regulate it separately from solid waste.
Whitney asks, what do planners need from extension organizations, et cetera, to enhance urban agriculture?
That is an excellent question. We got so much help from our local IFAS in this study. assistance with setting up community gardens would probably be the best one, because right now with the Right to Farm Act still being the way it is, that's really our best bet for encouraging urban agriculture. So we can and do absolutely recommend that cities reach out to the extension for help with that process.
How were you able to deal with like the on-site sales? Was that something that was a barrier in the countywide plan?
It was because we only allowed community gardens. We required them to be nonprofit, and we limited on-site sales. I believe it was 3 times a year, and that really was very restrictive. So the agricultural light definition is much more liberal. And that can go anywhere. That can go in residential categories or commercial. It's up to the local government how to use that and where to allow that. But before it wasn't even an option, and now it is.
So the local government would figure out like parking requirements and the types of, if it's a residential zoning or land use, they would have to figure that out.
Right.
Sheridan asks, what would you say is the biggest barrier to urban agriculture increasing in Pinellas County? What have you heard from municipalities that are hesitant / less familiar with the practice?
For those who are knowledgeable about urban agriculture, there's a lot of hesitancy with the Florida Right to Farm Act, and fear of allowing urban agriculture in more areas and then finding themselves not being able to regulate it enough to protect neighboring uses. Some of it is just lack of familiarity, and it's really not a front burner issue for anyone. Where you get the most interest from local governments is where you have the most interest from citizens. So if you have an active urban agriculture community in your city like St. Pete did, then the government will pay more attention and make it more of a priority.
Any other questions for Linda? If not, I will I'll ask the presenters to send me their slides, and I will send them out to the attendees and the One Bay group in general. And we've recorded the meeting, so I'm gonna edit it and try to get it up on our YouTube channel. But thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much to our speakers. I think this was a good conversation, and we really got to start thinking about some of the challenges to urban agriculture, but some of the ways that we can start to actually address the challenges as well. Thank you all. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Carrie. You too.